everybody today?
Good.
Yes?
Yes.
Having a good week?
Yes.
Sure. Sure. We had a good week. Okay. So we are continuing our discussion of relationships variously. For those of you who weren't here last week, I'm Rabbi Rutenberg. I work for Hill International. I'm thrilled to be here.
Can we have any people from last week? You weren't here last week.
The folks, Daniela in the office can give you the source sheet if you want it. And yeah, so last week we talked about a very specific and sort of loaded and important set of relationships, right? Parents and children. And today we're going to talk about another very specific and very important kind of relationship that is between spouses. So, and particularly, well, start here. Oh no, no marker. No marker. Okay, so we're just gonna write with our brains. Like we're just gonna use the what? Sure, if you want. I mean, we can even do it without.
Sure.
Okay. I'm almost not sure how to start. If we're gonna write in a minute, but not. How are people doing? Fine. Did you have a good week? Tell me something wonderful that's happened in the last 7 days.
Went to a service and used
Okay, how was it?
a baptism.
Oh, Zelda to somebody.
Family.
Ultra.
Classic reform, Rabbi. Classic reform.
Wow. Okay.
Real classic reform.
Cool.
But they love BJBE and they want to swing more towards us.
That's a good thing to inspire. What else?
I had my daughter's shower. She's getting wed January 19th.
No.
Thank you.
I'm very excited.
Mazel tov.
I went to a baby naming at my niece's house, and it was a great niece that was naming Rabbi Kadar.
Oh, you're amazing. Look at this. Thank you so much. You must be compelling. Okay, one more happy thing, and then let's keep going. Let's get started. Anybody else got a happy thing?
Next Saturday is my granddaughter's birthday.
Oh, so much happiness in this room. So much happiness. This is good. So we should all only have happiness and joy and blessings in our life, and health and goodness. Yes? Okay. When you think about if somebody says to you, what does Judaism say about sex? What are some things that come to mind?
It's good and you have to do it.
Yes.
On Friday night, especially on Friday.
Yes.
Okay, so the part where you have to do it and that it's good, we're going to talk about in a minute. Friday night. Do you know where that came from? Mitzvah night. There's a Kabbalistic idea that on Shabbat, each of us gets an additional soul. And so with my additional soul come together with my partner and their additional soul, then something really magical happens. Other things that come to mind? Just off the top of your head. Any connotations, good things, bad things, complicated things, questions? What does Judaism say about sex?
To me, the sex at the very beginning, where people are commanded to be fruitful and multiply, and it doesn't require planting a seed in the ground for that.
Make babies. Yeah, that is definitely the first commandment in the Torah. Technically, is go be fruitful and multiply. But that doesn't mean you can't use birth control. There are all sorts of forms of birth control in the Torah. Also, incidentally, and so we're just going to do a brain dump, and I'll do like little sort of trivia bits as we go. The commandment to be fruitful and multiply is only incumbent upon men. Anybody want to take a guess as to why that might be?
I can't hear you.
What?
You need a woman.
Why are only men obligated to be fruitful and multiply?
Inheritance. They have a prodigy. Inheritance.
Okay, there's inherent stuff. Why wouldn't women also be commanded to be fruitful and multiply? What?
They didn't have them.
Women were commanded to do stuff. We're obligated to keep Shabbat, all this stuff.
The man was supposed to be the initiator?
You cannot command somebody to do something that might kill them. Remember, how we think about childbirth today is really, really different than how it's been for most of history. You can't tell somebody they're obligated to do something that might kill them. You just can't. It's not about like what men are inherently like or any of that stuff. It's just, Medical risk. Okay, what else does Judaism say about sex?
It's hard for me to distinguish between sex and multiplication of people. They sort of go hand in hand. So when I'm thinking of God's word that we will ultimately be as many as the stars in the sky and the sand in the desert,
Mhm.
that implies that sex has to take place in order for that promise to come true.
It's true.
Was there sex in the Garden of Eden?
That's an interesting question. I do not, I mean, it depends
Well,
on what midrash you follow, basically. It depends on what allegorical story. Eve didn't become pregnant until they got kicked out, and they were walking around naked. It is said that a man will leave his mother's house and cleave to his wife, and so that word cleave sort of implies a certain kind of coming together. I don't know, it's a good question. Anybody else? Other things that just come up off the top of your head? Ideas, concepts, stereotypes?
It doesn't say that you need to be married to have sex.
Correct.
And it doesn't say that if one man were to be married, he couldn't take concubines.
Correct.
So that again gives a lot of license to the,
Well, it's not adulterous for a man, but it is for a woman.
Correct.
Yeah.
It was, the Torah is very clear that if a woman who is married has sex with someone who is not her husband, she will be stoned to death. And men could take concubines, men could take girlfriends, men could do whatever they want. This is obviously because, I mean, it goes without saying that our tradition has patriarchal roots, and that women, had not necessarily full status back in the ancient days. I think it's okay to name that. I think probably behind the whole particular hysteria around women having sex with people who weren't their husband is that people wanted to know whose babies were whose fathers. Right? That's also why people had a lot of opinions about virginity. And that having a virgin bride was the best because there was no question about the parentage at all. But all that said, the idea that sexual relationships, the rabbis in particular, really did privilege relationships that are married. There's a privileging, but there's tons and tons and tons of room in the tradition for sex with somebody that you're not married to. And that whereas in certain Christian traditions it's it's horrible sin if you're not married. In Judaism it's like it's a thing that happens. There's a story in the Talmud that Rava, the great teacher, when he used to ride into the town of wherever to be the scholar in residence for the weekend, he would get into town and he would say, "Who will be mine for the day?" And so too Rabbi Nachman, when he would ride into town, he would say, "Who will be mine for the day?" And there's this idea that sometimes that's what happens, and that's okay. And when I work with college students, this little factoid is of great interest to them. Needless to say. And then, and we'll get into this in a moment, then the question becomes, so if you can have sex with somebody that you're not married to, does that mean there are no parameters? No, of course not. And what does that look like? And so what does a holy sexual relationship look like? And what does a 21st century Jewish sexual ethic look like? And then they get interested in some way they want to talk to me, so it's good. Other thoughts, other ideas about things
Well,
Judaism says about
sex
sex?
is good, but we have certain parameters, purity,
What does that mean? Okay, do you want to tell me in a sentence, what is purity mikvah? Like, what are we alluding to? We're all grown-ups, we can use the proper words for things.
Well, but it's a matter of having sex under certain conditions.
What conditions? If you're not comfortable answering, somebody else want to answer?
In order to multiply, they wait after the period a week, and then they go to the mikvah.
Correct.
By the same token, a woman in Orthodox doesn't touch the Torah because you don't know if she's clean or unclean.
Okay.
So that it relates to that.
I wanna unpack this. First, I wanna unpack the word clean and unclean. A woman, so it says in the Torah, there are all sorts of ancient laws around ritual purity, is the way it's translated. but it's not, I don't think that's a good translation because it implies a good bad. The state I would use is a regular state or an elevated state, a holy state. Now somebody could not offer sacrifices at the temple in Jerusalem unless you were in an elevated state. If you were in a regular state, you couldn't. So, but most people, most of the time, were in this regular state. Impure, you might say, but that's if you touched a dead body, if a man had had any sort of seminal emission of any sort, including sexual, with somebody else involved or not. If there are all sorts of, medical things, either certain kinds of illnesses that would cause somebody to be in a regular state, or certain kinds of, for men, for example, gonorrhea is probably what they were talking about when they said certain kinds of, irregular discharges, or we don't really know, but that's a good guess. But things like, if you're around a dead body. Now, if you live out in the sticks in Israel, people die all the time. If you've been around a dead body, you've been in the tent where a dead body was, it's a thing, the open water jug, the stuff, it's like a certain kind of a cooties that gets transferred. So most people, most of the time, were in this state. But there were certain ways you could get into an elevated state so that you could be fit to offer stuff in Jerusalem. So depending on the thing, the dead body involves this very complicated ritual with ashes. Certain things you just wait a certain amount of time. Certain things you immerse in water. And then you're good to go and you can offer a sacrifice in the temple. Does that make sense? Okay. So most of them, and we don't have a temple anymore. Right? So by the way, all of us are in regular state. All of us are tamei, impure, right? We go to the doctor went to medical school, there was a dead body. There you go. So all of us are in this state. However, there was and by the way, regular menstruation back in the day certainly put you in that state. All of the things that got you out of the elevated state, by the way, are connected to death. Right? If you have a seminal emission, that's a baby you're not making. If you're menstruating, that's a baby you're not making. If you're in dead body, certain kinds of disease, right? It's the opposite of life stuff. So when you menstruate, that gets into the regular state. Back in the Bible days, it was just like wait a week and then you're fine, right? But at a certain point, regular healthy menstruation and irregular something's not right, sort of a woman's discharge, for example, if she has a miscarriage, right, would be considered this kind of irregular discharge, or if there's a certain kind of illness. So the illness one, you have to go immerse in water, and the regular one you don't. The illness one, you wait an extra week, the regular one you don't. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. So then at a certain point, those two things got conflated. And the thing is that there's a separate commandment in the Torah that says, don't have sex with a menstruating woman. So everything, because this stuff is cooties and it's catchable. So even though it's not really connected to offering sacrifices at the temple, somewhere else it says don't have sex with a menstruating woman, and people sort of detach that from the temple context. Are you with me? So now it went from wait a week, then go do whatever you want with your partner, to wait a week, and then wait 5 days of regular period, then an extra week, and then you go immerse in water, which is the mikvah, the ritual bath, and then go back and do whatever you want to do. Which, interestingly, if you sort of know anything about female biology, if you wait 5 days and then a week, and then you go out and have sex, when are you having sex? Most fertile time, right? So there's this interesting thing. However, it's also worth noting that as women age, their ovulation cycles change, and so women then wind up, there's something called halachic infertility. Women who observe, halakha is Jewish law, who observe this 5 days and then a week, and can't get pregnant because they're in that week time when they're ovulating. And so this has become a very controversial thing in certain corners of the Orthodox world. Do you give a woman hormones so that she ovulates later, or do you say, let's reevaluate this extra week? So that, right? I don't know if you can guess where I'm falling. I have opinions about it. So there are a lot of sort of more progressive folks in the world of Jewish law that say, let's go back to just keeping the week, and then you go to the mikvah, the ritual bath, because that's kind of how it's become a thing now, and that it becomes a way of connecting to this mitzvah, saying there are times when you have sex and times when you don't have sex, and maybe it's healthy in a marriage that, there's a Judaism notes all the rhythms of our lives, and so Judaism notes that rhythm too, and that's okay. You know, but also sort of going back to the biblical ideas to a certain degree. Does that make sense? Okay, so I just wanna, people should have a little background, so we're talking about sex. We should sort of know some of the things that happen in our tradition. And B, nobody is impure, nobody's dirty, nobody's bad. Some people talk about the extra week as the clean days, but there are more, like Orthodox feminists will talk about the white days, like that we don't have to give a moral judgment. Like menstruation is not bad. Menstruation is something that a healthy body does. If a healthy body happens to be female and, between puberty and menopause and all that stuff, right? Not pregnant, not nursing. It is not true that a woman who is menstruating can't touch the Torah. That is, it is a Baba Maisa. It is an urban myth that persists to this day, that a woman who is menstruating can't touch holy objects. It's crap. It's crap. The only thing a woman who is menstruating can't touch is her husband. Other than that, it's fine. Yes.
After menopause, do Orthodox women continue to go to the mikveh?
If you're not menstruating, you don't need to. It is also worth noting that the mikveh, at this point, it is a ritual bath. It's this holy, immersive space, and there are all sorts of other things that happen. A lot of people, men in the Orthodox world and men and women in more progressive circles, will go on Friday night or on Friday before Shabbat or before Yom Kippur, as it's just like you take out your soul and you wash it and then you put it back in your body, sort of the feeling again. There are also rituals around. People use the mikveh also now to mark. It's also used as part of the conversion ceremony. It's a key part of becoming Jewish. You purify.
Table and dishes.
What?
Dishes.
Yes, and if you want to, for people who keep a kosher kitchen, you bring your dishes to the mikveh and you sort of.
Oh, really?
It's a thing.
That's not me.
But also, people now more and more are using the mikveh if you want to mark the moment when you're finishing chemotherapy, or recovering from sexual assault, and you want to do a ritual around that, or if you've had a miscarriage. There's also a Jewish legal component to that, but also sort of as a spiritual thing, or to mark. People go before their weddings to mark all sorts of both things that exist that have been existing in the Jewish tradition for a long time, but also to say this is a time when I want to hit the reset button. And after a divorce, somebody might go because it's just it's a way of sort of hitting the
Cleansing.
I have a question about
Yeah.
the mikveh.
Yeah.
Seriously, I don't mean to be offensive. How often do they really change the water?
It's true, you're right.
It's a good question. I don't have that information, but I have a friend who is the director of Mayim Chaim in Boston, which is an amazing progressive mikveh that is meant to be open to people of all genders and all everything. I can ask. I don't actually have that information. I know they're pretty punctilious about making sure the best mikvahot are pretty punctilious about making sure it's clean for everybody. It does, yes. And so the mikveh needs to be living water. Usually, what that means, so if you want to go immerse in Lake Michigan, that counts. Or the ocean or a river, whatever, that totally counts. You have to get your whole everything, every hair, everything. You have to take off your nail polish, your earrings, you can't have anything between you and the water. And so in a mikveh, in a facility, usually it's a certain amount of regular water, and then they have something on the roof that collects rainwater, and the pipe goes down, and you sort of open up the pipe, and you put in a certain sort of necessary amount of the living water into the regular water, and then you close it. So that also makes it easier to change out the water a lot, because mostly it's not this sort of magical living water that we need. Okay, do we want to look at some sources?
Sure.
Okay. So I thought I would start with the actual commandment around Judaism and sex. And then we'll look at there's some other fun sources I just threw in here, because why not? Because there's some fun stuff.
The mikveh water is supposed to be chest high and a comfortable temperature.
Correct. Yes, so Lake Michigan in February, I don't recommend. Unless that's comfortable for you, yes.
I wanted to experience a mikveh, and I did go once with a group of women from here. It was lovely. I went to the one in Wilmette,
Uh-huh.
and
beautiful.
beautiful and clean,
Yes.
very clean, and they have a trickling water coming in, fresh water coming in. It's a giant bathtub, is what it is.
Yes, and the water is basically body temperature, so it, that feeling, all those connotations of sort of going back into the womb are there. It's very, very primal. It's like this safe, warm, loving
So it's supposed to be
experience.
changed every day, and there's supposed to be chlorine in the water to kill the germs.
Yep.
Same thing.
It's, I happen to think it's one of the most powerful sort of ritual experiences we have in our, on the menu. So, I really advise everybody to experience it at some point, and it's men and women and people of all genders. Okay, should we look at some text? Okay, does somebody want to read this first source? This is from the book, this is from Exodus, from the Torah.
If he takes another wife, he must not neglect her, the first wife's food, clothing, and sexual intimacy.
Okay, what are we talking about? Where are we? What's happening?
He can't ignore her, he's gotta take care of her like he took care of her before. He has a responsibility.
Basically, right? I mean, there's also something else that, is implied here, is that as we're sort of discussing, in the Torah there is precedent for men to take multiple wives.
Yeah, take another one.
Yeah, yeah. The Talmud says up to 4, because after that, who the hell has that kind of time? And they're expensive. And then, in case you're wondering, in the 11th century, Rabbi Gershom was a great rabbi in Ashkenaz, which is now Germany. And he basically he said, okay, enough of this multiple wives thing. You only get one. You get one. And also, if you're going to divorce her, you need her consent, which was also a great improvement over having for her.
Wait. If he divorces, he have to have the wife's consent?
If he divorces, if I'm going to divorce you, you have to agree. Or you have to at least be there to receive the thing. I can't divorce you without telling you, basically.
But you're not necessarily agree.
There's some nuances in there, and who says what and how we interpret it is for a
It's
whole
not
other
just,
hour.
I divorce you, and it's done.
No. But basically, this guy, Rabbi Gershom, said, okay, monogamy. At which point, a bunch of other rabbis from a bunch of other regions are like, you're an Ashkenaz, that doesn't apply to us. And it took a while for it to become, for monogamy to be more normative in the Jewish world, but now it is. So you can have multiple wives. But what do we learn about what your husband has to do for a wife? And we're egalitarian people, so we can put our own gloss on whether or not we think now it's reciprocal. But what does a spouse have to take care of for another person?
Food, clothing, intimacy.
Food, clothing,
and sex.
and intimacy. That's like, does any of that surprise you?
Yeah.
Yeah?
The intimacy surprises me,
Why does it surprise you?
because it's monogamy, yeah, technically you're still married. It seems like you're still married to this person.
Yes.
They're still married.
Yeah.
He just took on another
He took
one.
a second wife.
Now, don't they have, doesn't a man have to, well, supposedly, have sex with his wife a minimum of twice a week?
We're gonna get there.
The thing that surprised me about using the term sexual intimacy and making that a rule is that the Bible recognizes, the Torah recognizes, the fact that sexual intimacy does not necessarily require propagation, that it may be for other kinds of reasons.
Correct. And the obligation, so the word that gets used for sexual intimacy here is onam, which does anybody know what that means?
No.
It means time period. Like and you see it used in other contexts, the amount of time between things, right? The season, basically. And so here it refers to the amount of time between intimate encounters. So from here we see that having sex is not just an optional thing in a married relationship. It is mandatory. And you see in a ketubah, right, a wedding contract now, this is the precedent there's a lot of talk about this stuff because it's here, it's a commandment. You have to have sex with your wife on a regular basis. So, should we talk about the frequency? Should we get into it? Other questions?
Oh,
Well, why don't you read source number 2?
are we reading?
Please.
Students may leave to study Torah without the permission of their wives for 30 years.
For no?
Days.
Laborers for 1 week. The times for
Conjugal.
duty prescribed in the Torah for those with independent means every day, for laborers twice a week, for donkey drivers once a week, for camel drivers once in 30 days, for sailors once in 6 months. These are the rulings of Rabbi Rutenberg. Because their living doesn't permit them. If they're out at sea or if they're a camel driver, they can't do it.
Correct. Correct. So let's start there then. So let's go backwards then. So for sailors, once in every 6 months. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm in the Black Sea. I cannot come home tonight. Right? And then so camel drivers once in 30 days. So the camel driver was basically the intercity bus driver, right? The guy that's going to get you from Chicago to Madison, right? So or wherever, right? So he's going long distances. So once in 30 days, does that seem reasonable? Excellent. And then, so donkey driver, so he's the intercity bus driver, right? He's like down to Halstead, over to, once a week. That make sense?
Yeah.
And again, that's sort of a logistical thing. So, laborers twice a week. Now let's talk about that.
They're tired, dirty.
Totally. Even if they're working locally, their job might be a little further out, but even if they're working locally, it's hard work,
They're tired.
Yeah, twice a week. Does that seem reasonable? Yeah, you build muscle, something. Okay, for those with independent means every day. So tell me about that.
They're men of leisure. Some they are able to have leisure time for that.
Yeah, what else are you going to be doing with your time? Come on.
So if you're retired, you're supposed to study Torah every day, theoretically.
Because we're not talking about studying Torah.
Well, this is,
70 times for conjugal duty
Oh, these are
prescribed
duties.
in the Torah. What are you supposed to be doing every day? Having sex. This is about how often a husband should be having sex with his wife. Or I'm going to be very 21st century, any partner should be having sex with his or her partner, yes? Of whatever gender. For those with independent means every day, what the presumption is, got time on your hands, right? What else are you going to do? And it should know, so remember last week we talked about how the Mishnah is this is a Mishnah, so the Mishnah is this earlier source, and then the Gemara, the Talmudic discussion, talks about what's going on in the Mishnah. So the Gemara on this says, every day, who the hell is that kind of energy? And then, and they go back and they rebuttal and they explain it, whatever, but the rabbis of the Talmud, even if you don't have anywhere else to be, come on, you get to be tired sometimes too. So that's that piece. And then students may leave to study Torah without the permission of their wives for 30 days, laborers for 1 week. So somebody want to explain that line to me? As long as we're putting it backwards.
Excuse me. Why would somebody need to leave their home for 30 days to study? Away from their home? Why can't they go?
Because the rabbi that they're going to study with is in the next city. They want to study with a famous rabbi, or they have to travel.
Yeah, there were certain, just like, these days, you go to Harvard or Yale to study, right? And if you live in Albany, you have to travel to get there. There were a few major famous places of study, and there were other smaller ones too, that some of them were the next town over and some of them were quite far, where you could actually learn and be in the study house and do it deeply. So why students may leave to study Torah without the permission of their wives for 30 days? Somebody want to explain what's going on, what the logic is here? Why would they need permission for their
Well,
wives?
Torah comes first, evidently. Responsibility to the Torah or to study comes over your responsibility to your wife.
What specific responsibility to your wife?
Sexual relations.
Sexual, right, okay. You know what? We are definitely talking about how often the wives need to be taken care of, yes?
I was also thinking about why the study of Torah is, I mean, I'd say the study of Torah is greater than all of the rest. Ava did already.
So there's a lot of tension about it. And the passage, the Gemara, the chunk of Talmud that talks about this Mishnah is amazing. And I wish I could bring the whole thing to you. There's story after story after story about the tension between, I mean, Torah is the other woman, basically. And all of the passion and intensity and desire you want to put into your study or on the home front. And there are all of these stories about, you know, he's at the study house and does he come home in time, or, you know, what does he pick? And, you know, this was a living tension for the rabbis. But how, like, can you just, so if Torah study is so important, can you just take off forever?
No.
30 days. And for 30 days, the wife is going to go without sex. And after 30 days, and if he wants to stay longer, what does he need? Permission, right? It's not, you don't have to be, if you want to go learn a little bit, we think that's going to be a huge priority, so she can live with it for a month, right? She can manage a month without him home, but if he wants more, and if he wants to go learn more, she has to be willing to give up her right to sexual intimacy, right? He needs her permission. If she's like, fine, go, whatever, I'm tired, fine, great, everybody's in agreement. But if she says my needs matter, then this is a value. They don't say students can go off and study for 5 years without the wife's permission, right? So what does this tell you about, I mean, this whole passage, what does this tell you about how the Torah is thinking about women and men and sexuality and desire and all of that?
Well, they're putting the responsibility now on the woman, whereas I think basic desire is, generally speaking, a man has more libido than the average woman, generally speaking. But now they're putting this obligation on the woman.
So I want to be careful to make sweeping statements about what men are like and what women are like here. I think we want to not make any assumptions of that kind. Does it seem like the text is assuming that the man's libido is the big one?
No.
No. And this is one of the things I love so much about this. Like, we have in our culture today, the story is that men want it, and, you know, we sell computers with, you know, babes in bikinis, and, you know, we sell cars with babes in bikinis, and we sell beer with babes in bikinis, and men can't help themselves, and my eyes are up here, and all of this, and we train, I think, our young men to be the kind of people that are, you know, constantly thinking about sex and, you know, can't, you know, all of the stereotypes about, the teenage boy, you gotta watch out, right? And girls are very good, virginal,
Sure.
you know, all they want is love and Prince Charming, right? These are the big cultural stereotypes. Here, what are we learning about women?
Women have rights to.
Not just rights, needs. They have desire, right? Here there is a basic presupposition that women have sexual desire and that they have a right to it. I think this is very radical for the 21st century, frankly.
But it's also written by men.
Correct. And we have to always remember that these texts are written by men, to men, talking mostly about men, and yet still they're walking in with this assumption, right? Even so, even in this kind of testosterone-fueled study house, there's something going on in their culture that says, like, of course women have sexual desire. Of course they want, you know, intimacy and, you know, and maybe connection and love and all of that, but we're not talking about men have to come home and give their wives a long snuggle, right? It's a very special kind of snuggle, we'll put it that way. Like, women have sexual desire, that's okay, that is legitimate. And we don't even see that very much in our world today.
But does the word intimacy mean just to be with the person, to have a conversation, to share some experiences? I would think.
They're talking about sex. They're talking about very, very specific kind of conversation, yeah.
But in a way, you could push that boundary that just a woman or a man, there's more to it than just, I would think it's over than just sex.
Yeah, and I think this is how I choose as a 21st century person to, I make real choices about how I read this text. You can be very, very literal about it. I think it's part of what we do today is we try to understand really what they're saying underneath it. And so I have several takeaways from this. One, couples should try to come together sexually as often as realistic and reasonable, right? There's a real laborers, you're home every day, but you know, sometimes it's not realistic. And that's okay. And by the way, if everybody agrees that they don't want sex, you know, that twice a week, like there's a new baby in the house, nobody, you know, whatever, that's fine. You know, you're not obligated to have, this one of the big things in Judaism, consent is a non-negotiable. I mean, the Talmud actually outlawed marital rape in, 500 CE? And North Carolina didn't outlaw marital rape until 1992. As many layers and complex as our tradition is, in some ways we are far ahead of the game. The Talmud knew that you know, consent is a non-negotiable. But couples should come together as often as possible. And couples need to have time to be with each other, right? This is not about who's taking care of the dishes, the kids, or all of that. There's like, in a lot of families, there are families with children, there becomes this sort of partnership level where somebody's taking care of chores and somebody's taking care of children and some people's running this errand and, you know, the sort of stuff that's not really about the romance of being together, but that their couples need to make time for this other kind of connection. And maybe that day that, you know, that laborer, that one time of the 2 times a week, it's actually more snuggles on the couch and, you know, having a real conversation if everybody's agreed for that. But like, sexuality is a value. Thoughts, comments, questions?
Yeah, I was not reading it that women have needs and desires. I was reading it as the procreation, that, you know, if you're there a certain number of hours that you should have sex so that you procreate, not that it's because the woman is interested in having sex.
Except that this principle holds if she's pregnant, it holds if she's menopausal, it holds if she's, you know, nursing and not likely to be ovulating. So it's not necessarily, you know, or infertile also, you know, it doesn't necessarily presume.
Doesn't say when she's not.
This does not say a couple where, you know, that is between, where she is between the ages of, you know, 18 to, you know, 45 should have sex all these times. It's a couple. And, you know, it's not, this is, yes, the baby making thing is a thing, but this is saying sex, even if it's not procreated, is a value.
Also, by putting limitations, keep your wife satisfied so she won't wander and have sex with someone else while you're gone.
I think you're you're putting a lot into that. I think that there's a lot of stuff you're putting into the text. I mean, that might be there, but I
You
you
take
know,
care of your
but
responsibility.
but it's just because she has a need, and sometimes we can say she has a need.
Well, I was going to say, doesn't it also consider the woman's obligations, that women have certain obligations of childcare, the household, and such?
Why are those being taken care
Let's
of?
say a nursing mother considers that.
Hold on one second.
Just so you guys know, we have a guy who's working on a piano next door. So I'm gonna close this door, but if you hear anything, that's what it is.
It's our melodic interlude.
Yeah.
And this is again the part, but there is another mission that talks about women's work and women's obligations and how she can lighten her load and all of that. I mean, there's also discussion of that in this, actually the same chapter. There's conversation about that. But here we're, you know, if she's nursing, if she's tired, if she's whatever, and she doesn't feel like it, okay. And women also work. I mean, they did spinning in the market and all of that, you know. But if she doesn't feel like it, that's fine. But the text is saying that, you know, she has a right to.
So I agree with your primary interpretation, but my thought this requires the woman to not respond to her needs, perhaps the frequency that she would like. Because if the student is gone for 30 days, she's going to have to deal with it. If the saver is gone for 6 months. So there's an interesting, it's almost as if, I think you could make somewhat of an article that whoever wrote this was a little less concerned with women's needs than perhaps a woman could be if she wrote this.
I love the comments that are like the perfect segue into the next text. Please read number 3. That was brilliant. You could not have done it better.
It said, Rabbi, son of Rabbi Hanan, what is the law in the case of a donkey driver who wants to become a camel?
So now we have somebody who's has home once. What do we say? Once every once a week to once every 30 days, right? Okay.
And the other replied, a woman who prefers one cow to curls with frugality to 10 cows with abstinence.
So
Buy your wife with money.
So
Make
what-
a better living.
What is the presumption if he says, if he suddenly has an opportunity to take a job that's gone from being, the cubicle guy that's right in town to a more senior position that has a lot of, business travel, can he take the job without her consent?
No.
No, why?
But she prefers the other.
Uh,
She prefers the lesser income to having him home.
She might, right? And the question here is, can he do it without her consent? If she says, honey, this is a great opportunity for you, I'm really excited for you, you'd really love this work, this would be great for the college fund, whatever. There are real reasons why people would take a better paying job, right? But it gets to be her choice because that decision has an impact on her. Right, so the rabbis are absolutely understand that, a woman gets to decide, if she prefers the checkbook or the intimacy. And it's not, there are real valid reasons why somebody would say we have to be practical, take this job, right? But what's the assumption here?
I'm struggling to understand this, right?
Okay.
A man telling a version of the law, splitting women and men.
Correct.
So this seems to me to be a gross generalization. It doesn't seem to me to be a requirement. It's simply a statement about a generalization about what women.
No, there is, and this is the part where it's hard when I take 3 lines out of context, and I apologize for that. But this is, the underlying legal question is, can he take the job without her consent? And the answer is no.
Okay, so that's what surrounds this.
Correct. So, again, there's such a high value on a woman's sexual needs that it, intercedes in all sorts of places.
It's just, of course, this is destroying stereotypes. It's not when we think of the Torah and of the Talmud as being so rigid and so male-oriented that women aren't a part of it, and women, even modern women, on surface reading feel so discounted. And when you go into it, you find out that isn't true at all.
Sorry.
Yeah. But it's just, it's empowering.
Listen, there is plenty of patriarchal BS in the Talmud. I will not, I don't want to sugarcoat, and I get very antsy when people try to present, Judaism is everything that everybody has ever said in the history of Judaism is magical and great for everybody, no problem. Women, slaves, and minors is a legal category, right? Which is problematic on several levels. There are plenty of places where we as modern people can have a conversation with the sources about how to nuance and what categories we want to prioritize and all that. But there's also plenty of stuff that's genuinely just straight up, there's a lot to offer.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm getting a sense that maybe right along with this sort of a feminist interpretation or feminist possible, isn't it, that this is rabbis saying, for the sake of the marriage, for the sake of the relationship, not just for the sake of the women's needs, that these things are necessary in order to create a stable relationship that allows children and
I don't think those, for me personally, those things are not mutually exclusive.
say
Right.
I don't personally think those things are mutually exclusive. You know, and then I could extend that further and say a part of a healthy, stable relationship is one where everybody feels like their needs are getting met. You know, whatever the gender of the people. And, you know, my favorite way to teach this is to first unseat some assumptions about how women are talked about in the tradition, and then to say what happens if we take the gender off of all of these roles for today. Like what do we learn about values and priorities? And I think it's true that making sure everybody's needs are met helps strengthen the relationship. I don't think those things have to be at odds at all.
Isn't there in the Torah a passage that says that a man should not waste his sperm?
Yes. Well, it doesn't say that. There is a story of a woman who was with her husband. He died, and then there's this principle called levirate marriage, where if a man dies and there were no babies, because he was married, there were no children, the brother marries the wife, and the first child that comes out of that relationship is considered the dead guy's son. Like we've just sort of retroactively somehow produced an heir with the same basic DNA. Does that make sense? And if he doesn't want to do it, then there's a ritual where he can get out of it. And again, we want to remember that in biblical days, women were very, very vulnerable without male protection. And so this also could be a way of the family taking care of the woman and not sort of casting her out without resources, whatever. So in this story, first guy dies, then the brother is supposed to be having sex with the woman, and he sort of he has cold feet at the last minute, and so he pulls out and spills his seed on the ground, and then he dies. And then this is Judah, who's one of Joseph's brothers, is the father of these boys, and Tamar is the woman. And so then he says, I'm not going to give you the third son, sorry, you're in this sort of limbo period where you're going to maybe get married to this guy and maybe not. And then Tamar is a prostitute, and then winds up having sex with Judah, and then the baby winds up being one of the ancestors of King David. So it's just like this noble thing that she did to right this wrong. Anyway, so in this story, Onan is the one who spills the seed on the ground. Has anybody ever heard the term onanism?
Onanism is
What is onanism?
Onanism is actually extrapolated to be masturbation.
Correct. And so, people have said, well, he spilled his seed on the ground, therefore the sin is that you're not supposed to waste your seed and you should always put it inside the woman where it belongs, And so masturbation is bad and has created, all sorts of complexes for generations of yeshiva boys. I take quibble with this interpretation because the sin is not going through with live-right marriage, right? The actual sin is that he had an obligation that he failed on. He was not masturbating. He was in the middle of having sex with a real live woman. And we'll actually get to some sources, hopefully, if there's time, that complicate the idea, the spilling the seed thing a little bit. So I think there are ways to read this that actually, get you to masturbation is actually a healthy part of being a functioning person, post-pubescent person, and that's okay. But definitely there is a through line in the tradition that is pretty strict about male masturbation in particular, just as it's pretty strict about male same-sex relationships. We don't have time to get into it. We can do that next week if people are interested. And very, very lenient about female same-sex relationships and very lenient about female masturbation because basically there is a presumption that women's sexuality exists primarily if there's a penis around. Do with that what you will. We also get to complicate that. Do you want to keep going?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, I'm trying to decide, I sort of want to, let's do number 5 next, and then hopefully we'll have time to go back on around to 4 because it's, let's do 4 quickly. Can we look at 4 quickly, just because it's a great text and it'd be a pity to miss it?
Rav Kahana went to the home of Rav and lay down under his bed. Rav Kahana heard Rav talk, laugh, and do his deeds. Rav Kahana said to himself, "Is the mouth of my teacher like one who has never before tasted food?" Rav, suddenly aware of Rav Kahana's presence, said, "Kahana, are you here? Get out. This is not proper behavior." Rav Kahana replied, "This is Torah, which I need to learn."
So, Rav Kahana went to the home of Rav, his teacher, and lay under his bed. When I teach this in campuses, students immediately get this and start freaking out. You know, could you imagine being under your chemistry professor's bed? Right? It's like a little, restraining order behavior. Right? Rav Kahana hears Rav talk, laugh, and have sex. So what? And then so what is he trying to? What is he doing? What's his goal here?
It's about privacy, and this is a special act between a man and a woman. And Torah has its place, but so does sex. And it's between 2 people. It's, because this might lead to him saying, "Hey, you're having such a good time, let me join you." That's the presumption, I would think.
That is actually not the presumption, but I've never heard that. I get this act a lot. I've never heard that. That's great. This is Rob's position, right? Rob is the teacher, and he says, "What are you doing here? Get out. This is a private thing." And what's Kahana's response to him?
Torah.
This is Torah. So what's going on in Kahana's, tell me, so this is Rob's perspective. What's Kahana's perspective on what's going
He
on?
wants to learn how to do the deed.
Yes. He wants to learn how to engage in sexual relations. So there are several assumptions under that, including, what are some of the assumptions underneath that assumption? How do you learn how to be a person sexually?
Never had sex before.
He's never had sex before. Is this something you can learn from a book?
No.
No. And this is where the importance of living, breathing mentors in people's lives are important. And the rabbis lived in a universe that the question of how does the rabbi tie his shoes was a very deep question, right? And if you think about the things that you have learned when you were around somebody that you really respected and valued about, how does this person speak to the waiter? What does this person do when they walk past a homeless person, right? There's a lot that we can learn about how to be a person from the people that we value, right? And, for any of you who have, I heard there were a couple of bat mitzvahs around, for people who have younger folks in your lives, the importance of being a living, breathing resource to people as they try to learn about sexuality. There's also what else is embedded that you have. Sexuality isn't something you are, know about from the start, right? There is a process of learning how to be a sexual person in this world, right? So, if any of you have tweens or teenagers in your lives, you can buy them a copy of Our Bodies, Ourselves. You can buy them a copy of Heather Karenina has a book called S.E.X, which is a fantastic book. Jacqueline Friedman has a book called What You Really, Really Want. That's an amazing book for people who are really late high school and college. And you could say, I'm one of the people that you could talk to if you have questions, right? There are ways that we need to be living mentors to help people grow in their understandings about sexuality. And what did Kahana, and what is the last line? This is Torah, which I need to learn.
It's not proper.
But that's what his teacher said, and he gets the last word then.
Yeah.
So what does this mean, this is Torah?
Well, to me, it means it's uncommanded to learn this. And perhaps the way he did it was not socially acceptable or acceptable to his teacher. But I think, in a sense, he's correct. He needs to learn how to have sex.
Correct.
Reasonable ways.
Sure, because in part this is a specific commandment, but also like this is not just Torah, this is Torah, right? This is holy, holy teaching. How to be a person in the world and how to be a sexual being with someone else is part of how you be a holy human being. And that sexuality is not pitted against sort of, sex is bad, is like the not holy thing you do and then you go to pray and then you're holy. This is part of how you are a holy person. And what does he learn? Now, let's just one more quick thing and then I want to move on. So, he heard the teacher talk, laugh, and have sex, and he says, "Is the mouth of my teacher like one who has never before tasted food?" What does that mean? That line. Hungry. What else? It's something new. Have you guys ever been around like a 1-year-old or whatever age the first time they have chocolate? The look on their face. Right? I didn't know this existed. This is amazing. Children are amazing because they have what they call in Zen tradition beginner's mind. Right? This what Heschel would call radical amazement. This thing that every time, everything is new, everything is fresh, everything is amazing. Now, Rock is the teacher, right? Do you presume that this is the first time he's having sex with his wife? No, they've been married 30 years or something, right? And yet, what are we learning about? So that, 30 years of regular basis interactions, and how is he with his wife in bed?
Wonderful, joyous experience.
They're talking, they're laughing, and it's as though he is with her for the first time. Now think about what is involved in being that fully present with somebody and having that kind of beginner's mind, which, some Robin Williams line at some point, same-sex marriage, come on, every marriage, you always have the same sex, Like, that sense of routinization that you can get when you're doing anything that you've done a lot of times, right? You're walking to work, it's the same route, you're not really paying attention, you're off in your thoughts, you're looking at your phone, right? Instead of noticing that there's an amazing flower shop right here that just changed its display and going, wow, that's beautiful, right? Then when we are doing the dishes, you're sort of doing the dishes versus like you're warm, the soap is, you're feeling the soap, you're feeling the warm water, you're fully present in the act of doing the thing, right? You're bringing your whole being into whatever you're doing. And here, even in our intimate relationships, this is what the great master is doing.
Well, it's the same thing as having a relationship with God, because if you're present with God, you have that fresh feeling. I mean, it comes and goes, but it's the same thing as an intimate relationship. You have to have a yin and yang, you have to have a balance. You have to have the relationship.
So I mean, this is, in the Zen tradition, they say being fully present in the moment is a fully present thing now, and, in Judaism, it is this thing about bringing the divine into this space as well. And there's another text that I don't know if we'll get to or not, that basically, there's space for the holy in every moment, right? The act of washing the dishes, as mundane as it is, can be really profound and exquisitely holy if you're there and you're feeling the water, and you're hearing the water, and you're feeling the soap, and you're seeing the bubbles, and you're just there. You're not thinking about like the thing you just talked to about somebody, or what you want to eat, or what you just cooked, or you're not thinking, you're just doing, right? You're just in it. And, we can also sacralize our most intimate relationships when you're just 1,000% with the person, as though it's the first time you've ever had that brownie, Thoughts, questions, comments?
Let's do this.
Okay, should we start? Okay, more. This is gonna get people's hackles up at first, but I want to complicate it for you. Number 5.
Our sages said, a man may do whatever he pleases with his wife at intercourse. A parable. Meat which comes from the butcher may be eaten salted, roasted, cooked, or steamed. So with fresh fish from the fish market. A woman once came before Rabbi and said, Rabbi, I set a table before my husband, but he overturned it. Rabbi replied, my daughter, the Torah hath permitted thee to him. What then can I do for thee?
At some point, I'll get the literary translations out of here. I can, sort of cut and paste, and then it's fine. Okay, what's going on in this text? What are they saying here?
Well, how it reads is A man can do whatever he wants with his wife,
Yeah.
but I think what it's really saying, if the wife permits it, that's
Absolutely.
permissible.
Absolutely, there is, as I said
There's no
before,
restriction on what you can or cannot do.
do you guys agree with everything yet?
There is restriction.
There is restriction.
Se não ignora essa restriction.
Okay, so, what do you mean by Sodom and Gomorrah?
I don't want to say it.
What? Anal sex?
Yes.
Okay, we are all adults, we can use grown-up words here. So, we'll get there in a second. Do people agree with this comment? And by the way, people who haven't spoken, I'd love to hear everybody's voice in the room. That, you know, basically this is saying a husband and wife can do kind of whatever they want in bed, right? People, so we have, you can have your meat salted, roasted, cooked, or seethed. Yes? What?
Different choices, different.
There's so many choices. Not hamburger, right? There's no veal parmesan here, or not cheeseburger, right? There's no veal parmesan, there are some limits, and that's where, for example, consent becomes really important. But, you know, go have fun, do whatever you want to do. And I have heard a reading of this that I think is interesting, where basically the men typically bought the meat from the butcher, and women typically bought fish from the fishmonger. So then, how would you read this metaphor? The historical fact that men were the ones who did this, and women typically the ones that did this.
And he makes it equal. It's
Yeah.
what it is with fish, the same as with meat, if she wants.
Her ideas about what would be fun and his ideas about what would be fun both count. And again, everybody has to agree to what's happening, right? Dan Savage is a sex columnist, and he writes about couples being good, GGG, good giving and game, right? As long as it's not something that you think is totally, disgusting or horrible or just sounds like a terrible idea, it's not exactly your thing, it's your partner's thing, great, enjoy, whatever. There's a certain amount of generosity that sometimes happens in a marriage because, different people have different ideas about what's fun. That's allowed. So we have this basic principle, couples can kind of do whatever they want in bed, right? Then, a woman once came before Rabbi, and remember, consent is a non-negotiable. And she said, Rabbi, I set a table before my husband, but he overturned it. So there's something going on, she's concerned if it's kosher or not. Rabbi says, my daughter, the Torah is permitted me to you, what do you want from me? What is this metaphor? Overturned table.
Did she suggest something that he didn't want?
No.
No.
Maybe she chose something that he didn't like. Fish.
Nope.
She put herself out there and used it.
So some people read this as, woman on top, but generally the commentators from Rashi, who's an important 11th century commentator on, basically read this as anal sex.
Oh,
Yes. And she's saying, we had this thing happen, is this permitted? And he's like, the Torah says you guys are permitted to each other, don't bother me, get out of here, So, what, does that surprise you? By the way, this is also always gives me a lot of points when I teach with college students. You just said that. The rabbi just said that. The Torah has everything. Questions, comments, thoughts? You guys are now looking at me with these
No, but
perplexed
when you
faces.
say it like that, then, rereading of it,
This is the text. This is the Talmud. This is the foundation stone of our religion, people. Yes.
So there's a lot of layers to everything, but I guess my question is that you talk about consent. So is it consent to have sex, or is it consent to our type of sex?
Oh,
Yes. Yes and yes.
And what does this verse say about that?
About anal sex?
No,
Okay.
any kind of choice about the type of sex.
The Torah says relatively little.
It says.
So this is the Talmud. So this is the later source.
It says a man may do what he pleases with his wife.
Right.
So I'm asking the tension between that statement and the statement that it must be consensual between the two partners in terms of having sex and the type of sex.
Anybody want to respond?
We don't care about it.
Oh, so the question is, where's consent in all of this? So basically, the presumption is that everybody's consenting to everything. Now, what they're addressing is not, does everybody agree? But the thing is, if everybody agrees that we're going to bring handcuffs into the bedroom, you know, that's fine. If everybody agrees that, so that's the butcher and the fishmonger, right? So you have this sort of male piece and the female piece, like, if everybody agrees that we're going to overturn the tables, then that's fine. If everybody, you know, but there has to, it is assumed that there is not something, a man may do whatever he pleases with his wife, meaning the Torah doesn't think there's anything wrong with you guys using light bondage, or whatever.
So my question is this. So the woman in this story is coming to the rabbi and saying, I set my table this way. This is the way I wanted to have sex. And it got overturned. And we had sex in a different way, whichever way you want to read it.
Correct.
So is that consensual?
Yes, it's consensual. She's concerned that,
I guess I'm not understanding.
so her concern is not, he had sex with me, I didn't want it, but we did this thing. I was expecting one thing to happen, this other thing happened. It was fine with me, but I'm concerned that it was a sin. I'm concerned that the Torah thinks we did something wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I'm not getting that from the language. I think that, I'm not getting that from the language. Maybe I missed
And this is, again, I apologize, this is what happens when I bring stuff out of context. I could have brought you the entire passage of Nedarim 20b, there would have been all these digressions, and it's not relevant, and then we turn it right back to the, yeah, I apologize.
Excuse me, can you narrow this down to what does the Torah say is not permitted sexually? And specific.
So again, when it says there's no guilt parmesan, right? What is not permitted is definitely rape.
Okay.
Would people be, so here are two possibilities for next week. One is we talk about same-sex relationships, and one is that we talk about how to be a mensch in life in general, which is more interesting to people. Okay, so on one foot, there's a big flow of Jewish law that says that same-sex relationships is problematic. I and a lot of other people have say that if you read the text closely, it actually says that rape and dominance are again, if you look at all of the things where Sodom and Gomorrah is really a story about rape. You know, there are a lot of, you know, either same-sex relationships are problematic because they were about, you know, asserting dominance over somebody. It was not about two people who loved each other and wanted to be together, or it was a reflection of pagan practices, both in the Canaanite world and in the Greco-Roman world, where male homosexuality and worship of Zeus, for example, were conflated. So people were concerned about that. Again, two observant Jews who love each other and want to be together, it's a different thing. So even today, but what we need to know here is that a couple that is together in a kosher way, they're married, everybody's of age, it's consensual, whatever, go have fun. That's our takeaway.
What is the age of consent?
Younger than is comfortable for me in terms of Talmudically. Women, I mean, you know, age of consent now in various states is, you know, 16, 18, depending. In the Talmud, women got married right around the time they were having, you know, pubescent, basically. Which makes my skin crawl a little bit, but different time, different place, different era, you know, and this is where we get to bring in our 21st century norms into how we think about this stuff now. Should we keep going? Okay. I want to kind of go, I want to go to 7, and then if we have time, we'll go back to 6. Somebody want to read? So we've been talking about this anal sex question a little bit. This is like sort of a continuation of that. This is Maimonides, who is 12th century major legal commentator, and he's commenting on this passage that we just read. Number 7, come on.
A man, No, Erwin, go.
A man's wife is permitted to him. Therefore, a man may do whatever he wishes with his wife. He may have intercourse with her at any time he wishes and kiss her on whatever limb of her body he wants. He may have natural or unnatural relations, as long as he does not bring forth seed in vain. However, it is a sign of piety not to show too much levity, but to sanctify himself at the time of intercourse.
So, again, man's wife, like, y'all are permitted to each other. You can do whatever you want. You can have intercourse whenever, right? There are no restrictions on whether it's morning or night or daylight or whatever, right? Kiss her wherever she wants, on whatever limb you want. We all pretty clear on what we're talking about here? Good. You may have natural or unnatural relations, meaning.
What is unnatural relation?
What do you think?
What would be unnatural?
Anybody want to take a stab on this?
Oral sex?
That is not what we're talking about. I mean, that would be talking about the kissing on any limb, right? Anal sex. This is what we've been talking about. So he's saying, again, Maimonides here is saying, yeah, have anal sex. And then, so he says, as long as he does not bring forth seed in vain. And there's another source that I didn't, there's only so much stuff you can put down on a source sheet that is sort of together with this, that sort of elaborates on this. And it says, listen, anal sex once in a while, it's no big deal, even to bring forth seed, into that particular place as opposed to the baby making place. Okay, it happens. If that's the only way you're having sex, then there's a problem. But once in a while. So, just to sort of, and then, don't be, and it's funny because we have this Talmudic text where the guy is talking and laughing and and Maimonides is saying you have to show, piety and sanctity in that intercourse, which also gets into this idea of bringing God into the situation and that there's space for holiness in the bedroom. And so there, we have different voices in terms of what the tone is at the moment when things are happening. Thoughts, questions? Okay, let's go up to number 6. Because this is also pretty meaty. Somebody bring it.
And then you seek not after your own heart. Deducing from this, Rabbi taught, one may not drink out of one goblet and think of another.
That's a metaphor. What is it a metaphor for? I believe in spelling things out. Can we get somebody who hasn't spoken for a little bit to?
Having sex, thinking about somebody else.
Right. Okay. Keep going.
And I will purge out from among you the rebels, and them that transgress against me.
So we're not going to get into why they're bringing these verses and all of that. It's too complicated. But we have this verse, and then we're going to learn something from the verse. What are we learning? Rabbi Levi said. Keep going.
Rabbi Levi said, this refers to children belonging to the following 9 categories. Children of fear, intimidation, of marital rape, of a hated wife, of a vow ban taken, of a woman mistaken for another, of strife, of intoxication, of a mentally divorced wife, of confusion.
Okay, so here are 9 different ways, the times when having sex is not a great idea. When they say, it's bad that you have children out of the following categories, they basically mean don't have sex under these conditions, right? Okay, so what are let's get through them, okay? So, b'nei ima, like children of intimidation. So don't have sex when?
If you were really hard, really pushy, the wife really said, come on, I need it, I want it. Did you say rape?
So we have rape is spelled out somewhere else, and obviously how we define rape today and how they defined it then. So this is, this is a situation where one person is saying yes because, which these days we would say is not consented, it constitutes sexual assault, but back in these days they put it in a different category. But you cannot have sex if one person is only saying yes because they're afraid of some consequence, right? Or they're feeling intimidated, or, right? Yes? Okay, what's the next one? Marital rape. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay? A hated wife.
In other words, you're having sex not because of a hated wife, not because out of love or a need for intimacy with that person, but just because.
Or if they're doing their obligation, their obligation.
Yeah, you cannot have sex with somebody that you don't like. And if you hate your spouse always, or this week, or whatever, you know, if you, have disdain for them, right? This John Gottlieb is this writer on relationships, and he says that one of the greatest markers for divorce is when he brings all in these couples and he videotapes them interacting. If he sees any contempt in their interactions, he knows they're done, basically. So if you have contempt for the person, if you hate them, if you have disdain, what does the rabbi say? Why?
Because they're just a vessel for your seed, and not another human being.
Yeah. Right. Okay. What else? A vow or a ban taken. So this is kind of complicated. This means that if you're in the middle of fighting, you're like, you know what? I'm so mad at you. I'm not gonna have sex with you for a month. Right? You just made an oath to God. And oaths are a really, really big deal in the rabbinic world. They're taken very, very seriously because you just enacted something with the divine, right? You can't just undo that because you don't feel like it anymore, right? So even if you patch things up, 2 weeks into it, whatever, the drama's over, but you already promised to God that you can't have sex. So then, you can't have sex, right? So that's that, but you can't, so no going against your promises to God. So the bottom line is don't make any oaths. And yes, we have Kol Nidre, right, at the beginning of Yom Kippur, which is when they say, if you made an oath to God, we're gonna annul it, because otherwise you're screwed, right? Because people make oaths all the time that are really stupid, and we don't want you to be stuck sinning. So, that's the vow. Then a woman mistaken for another. What's the story there?
Rachel and Leah.
Yes. Okay. So this is the big problem is that so many of our this is a famous story when Rachel and Leah have Leah dresses up as Rachel and they have sex anyway. What do the rabbis think about that? It's problematic. There are all sorts of stories in the Bible that the rabbis are a little problematized by. There's the angels come to visit Abraham to let him know that Sarah's about to be pregnant with Isaac, or that she is pregnant, and he's running around basically fixing, meat and cheese. What? Abraham Avinu, our great ancestor, didn't keep kosher, But the stories in the Bible predate Rabbinic Judaism, and so do with that what you will. So we have. So no woman mistaken for another. What's wrong with that? What's the big deal?
The mistaken could be tongue in cheek. Oh, I thought you were coming together.
How do you know?
Well,
You're mistaken for another, how do you know?
it's a good question.
With a veil? She has a veil?
Yeah, I mean, whatever it is, they're twin sisters, who knows? But what's problematic about it?
They're not having a relationship with the person you're supposed to be
You
in.
should know. You should know who your wife, who your right.
Well, fine. So even if you, let's say you're, pretty easily duped, you should be having sex with the person you think you're having sex with. That's the same idea as don't drink out of one goblet and think of another, right? Like, over here. And then what's the next one? Strife. This is not make-up sex, right? Don't have sex while you're in the middle of an argument, while you're angry at somebody. Why?
All of these are prohibitions against sex for the wrong reasons.
Correct.
And this one is using sex as a device for something other than intimacy and other than love, just as a bargaining chip.
No, let's even take the bargaining chip piece of it. You're pissed off at the person, they're
Yeah.
pissed off at you, and you have sex anyway.
Could be a hurtful aspect to having sex.
It could be hurtful, but
It's not a loving, it's not an intimate.
it's not loving, it's not connective, right? That thing that's not just about the bodies coming together is missing, yeah.
Yeah, but this suggests that children, as a result of these kinds of relationships, are blacklisted for the rest of their life.
It's saying that they turn out bad, but the rabbis often say, children of such and such as a way of saying don't have sex during these conditions. Though this is less actually a commentary on the kids themselves than on, this is their using their their language to talk about what you should or shouldn't do, but, as the two adults, basically. So let's go through the last couple, and then we'll talk about what they all have in common. So, of intoxication, the college students always, when I get to this one, they're like, ah! What? What do you mean? So, and this is also, intoxication is not the same thing as a glass of wine after with dinner, right? So what's the problem with intoxication?
You're not there for the moment. You're not there.
There's nobody home, right? You're not present. Also, today we would say it's not consensual, right? If someone is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they are not legally able to give consent, period. So all these big rape cases that we've seen in the media lately, stories of people flying, these 100-pound 14-year-olds with 8 or 9 drinks, and then like there's no consent. There is nobody home. That's it's not consensual. But also, even if it's two people who love each other and want to be together, and they go out and get a little there's the sense that there's nobody home, and the rabbis take issue with that. So that's intoxication. Mentally divorced wife. What does that mean?
They're not physically divorced, but they're preparing emotionally, mentally to get divorced.
Who is preparing emotionally, mentally to get divorced? Remember these texts. Like who's talking to who? Men are talking to men. So who has decided what's happening?
So the man decides he doesn't want her, doesn't like her. He's divorcing himself from her.
Right, so this is the literal meaning, the plain meaning of this text is that he has decided he's going to dump her, but that he has not done so, and they're going to have sex anyway, and she has no idea what's going on. The 21st century gender neutral one is that anybody has decided already that they're going to break up, and not, one person is a little unawares, the other person is already decided that next Thursday they're going to get to talk, or whatever. Just look at the back, Jack. What's wrong with this? What's the big deal?
Deceitful.
It's deceitful. Yeah, and again, this whole, let's keep going. So then of confusion is a more specific case. I don't want to get into it. So what do all of these things have to have in common? What's the overarching theme of these 9 categories? What?
It's not consensual.
There's a lack of consent. What is the consent? Even if both people physically consent. You're in the middle of an argument, you both physically consent to having sex. What's the problem?
You were meant for each other.
What?
You were meant for each other.
You were meant for each other? Why is it problematic?
It's not love it. It's not godly. It's not. It's just. Sex becomes very animal.
Sex, a Jewish sexual ethic is about more than 2 bodies agreeing to do a thing, right? Yes, the basic, I agree that my body is going to do this thing with your body is baseline, right? And they're very clear about this here, as you saw. But that it's sex is about more than that. It's about 2 people coming together, being fully present, as though they had eaten the dish for the first time is like the ideal, right? But that you're fully there. You, not just your body, but all of you, is coming together with that person, and you guys see each other, and there's a connection there that's more than physical. And if you're not there, if you're mad, if you're not able to be fully connected and loving with the person because you're mad at them, because you're already halfway out the door, because you're a little drunky, whatever, They don't. Those are the wrong conditions, and that sex is too important a thing to do if you're not bringing yourself along with everything else. They want two people who see each other as human beings, who are able to be present with each other, and then, that's when the real magic happens. And so, with the college students, like we talk about, like extramarital sex, fine, right? But there are some baseline conditions. If you want to have a Jewish sexual ethic, this is why, 3 o'clock in the morning after, the major rager at the fraternity, when everybody's, completely soused, besides the consent piece, this is why, this is what you want. Even if you're not going to be with this person for the rest of your life, you have to be able to at least see them while you are in the same room with your clothes off. That is a baseline. And we hope for more, but as a baseline, you have to actually see the other person and be with them. And if you are hooking up with somebody that you kind of don't really like, there is this sort of lingo that gets thrown around now of hate sex, right?
Friends with privileges.
Friends with benefits.
Benefits,
Well,
yeah.
Okay, let's do,
Yeah.
let's have a test. So hate sex, definitely not. Friends with benefits. Could friends with benefits situation meet the criteria laid out here? What do you think?
What does that mean, friends of benefits?
That means-
Exactly what you please.
So,
Your buddies.
Anybody want to define friends with benefits?
Sorry.
So friends with benefits is basically two people who are friends, and sometimes they have sex. They don't need to be romantic. They don't want to be boyfriend-girlfriend or boyfriend-boyfriend or girlfriend-girlfriend. What?
They don't really love each other.
Well, they do, but not in a committed way.
Right. Right.
Committed.
And, but they're, that's a complicated case in terms of, I as the rabbi am not going to say, but at minimum, there are some minimum criteria here. If you are seeing the other person, there's respect, there's caring, there's connection. So maybe, but, it's not the ideal. The ideal is a committed relationship where two people are together and actually in it for the long run. Thoughts, comments, connection, questions on this? Okay, we are out of time. So the last text we didn't get, number 8 we didn't get to, which is kind of, basically shows us that foreplay and female orgasm are a value in the Kabbalistic universe. This is a 13th century text that is basically like, make sure she orgasms first. Make sure there's lots of caring and connection and piety and holiness and all of this stuff we've been talking about, right? You should say such things that will urge her to passion and intercourse, to affection and desire and lovemaking, that urge fear of heaven, piety and modesty, right? So there's this holiness and having a lot of fun physically are, again, all part of the same package, right? And your intentions have to be of the same and, all of that stuff. So there's a lot of power here. And I, for one, am really heartened by the way that Judaism talks about sexuality both as a very human, perfectly wonderful thing. Our bodies do give us the capacity to experience great pleasure, and I think that's amazing. And then the tradition thinks that that's amazing. And, and also pushes us to not just see our bodies as an instrument for pleasure, but as an instrument to connect to one another in a deep way and to the transcendent. So thank you all.
Question, please.
Yes.
What book in the Talmud is the conjugal rights?
Which, the number 2?
Number 8.
Number 8.
Number 8.
So this is not from the Talmud, this is from, this is a 13th century Kabbalistic text
All right.
that is both instructions to bridegrooms on how to comport themselves on the wedding night, and also has this deep theological stuff that unfortunately we didn't get to. So it's a pretty groovy text. I think I mentioned last week, I have a secret other life writing books. And so I have a book that I did a few years ago called The Passionate Torah, Sex and Judaism. Would people be interested if I brought in copies to sound like for you? This is something I do. Okay, so I'll do that. Thank you all.